In the headlines, mega infrastructure projects to come on stream with U.S. funding. A team of ministers from Suriname arrive in the country to push talks on various projects. Walda Lawrence pleads innocence as she faces more charges related to the 2020 elections.
I remain strong. I know I've done nothing wrong. And I continue to say that because that is what it is.
A massive housing event is slated for this weekend. And in sport, Avinash Ramzan and Akim Green examine the future of Chris Gayle and Sunil Narayan, the New Zealand tour and beyond. With the news, I'm Kurt Campbell. We're glad you can join us. First up, following a one-day visit to Guyana, the U.S. government has floated financing for local projects in the vicinity of $200 billion US. According to Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, Adam Bocher, who led the team of 6 U.S. agencies to Guyana. There is a keen interest in large infrastructure projects.
On Tuesday, a team of representatives from the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, the U.S. Treasury, the U.S. State Department, the National Security Council, Homeland Security, and the Export-Import Bank visited Guyana to discuss investment opportunities. The agencies met with President Irfan Ali and several ministers of the cabinet, along with the local private sector. Following the meeting with the business sector, Nicholas Boyer, chairman of the Private Sector Commission, told the media that the agencies talked about in excess of $200 billion US they can lend to Guyana for various projects. He spoke with the media at the sidelines of a joint press conference where he noted that this is the largest investment ever announced for Guyana.
I've never seen this sort of movement on an economic standpoint by the U.S. So clearly for us, it signals a new era in the U.S.-Guyana relationship, and I think that is something that we need to take advantage of. What they have talked to us about is the quantum of funds they can lend.
And how much is that?
Off the top of my head, it is in the billions. I think there was like US? Over 200, all the agencies in the room were over 200 billion.
The delegation was led by Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, Adam Bocher. At the joint press conference, he said the U.S. is looking to invest in the Deepwater Harbor, small and medium-sized enterprises, agriculture, and the reduction of electricity cost. But Bocher zoned in on the Quarantine River Bridge, which will link Guyana and Suriname.
We have now a foundation for an elevated and strengthened relationship between the United States and Guyana. And I think it started with the finalization of the elections, the democratic elections here that gave us the basis. And the administration here's commitment to private enterprise transparency and rule of law. Some of the topics I know we talked about just over there, I'm sure we'll talk about it with the President and the Cabinet, are how do we get the cost of electricity down so that the average person pays less. We talked about infrastructure, whether that's a deep water port, whether that is investment in a bridge now between Guyana and Suriname. So to have those opportunities, it's a rare time of alignment between Suriname and Guyana to have great new administrations that are investing in their private market.
Guyana and Suriname on October 10th visited Long Island in the Quarantine River, where the center of the bridge will be constructed. The U.S. International Development Finance Corporation was set up to advance American interests around the world. Asked whether these contracts will only be given to American companies, Bocher had this to say.
We have the ability to back U.S.-based companies in Guyana, but also other companies, Guyanese companies, too. So to your question, that's very important is we're American. We always prefer and we like American companies. We know that there's a lot of great American Guyanese that like to come in to invest, but we can back Guyanese companies as well in some of these efforts. So we're not just restricted, and we'll be looking with Nick and his team at all aspects to drive development here.
It was revealed that one of the likely projects to be funded by the loans is the proposed gas-to-shore project, which will harvest natural gas from the offshore petroleum activities to reduce electricity cost. Teams from the agencies and the local private sector and the government are expected to meet shortly to finalize the projects to move forward. Bibi Katoon, Newsroom.
We tell you now that a team of ministers from Suriname arrived in Guyana Wednesday morning for a 3-day visit to continue discussions on various initiatives started by the presidents of the two countries in August. The team is led by Surinamese Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Business and International Cooperation, Albert Ramdale. He's accompanied by Surinamese Minister of Public Works, Riyad Nur Mohammed, and the Minister of Public Health, Amar Ramdin, along with other government officials. During the visit, the foreign minister is expected to meet with Guyana's Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, PUT. The discussions are expected to focus on preparation for the launch of a strategic dialogue and cooperation platform. The ministers will continue discussions started by President Irfan Ali and President Chandrika Santoki in August. The heads of state has discussed the reopening of the Guyana-Suriname ferry service, the bridging of the Currentine River, tackling piracy and other issues. Last weekend, the two countries made their first move to begin bridging the Currentine River, which will link the two states. Former diplomatic relations between the Cooperative Republic of Guyana and the Republic of Suriname were established on November 25, 1975. One day after being arrested and held for hours for questioning by the police, chairperson of the People's National Congress Reform PNCR, Walda Lawrence, on Wednesday made yet another court appearance. This time she faces 2 new charges. Already facing private criminal charges, the legal team of former Health Minister Walda Lawrence will now have to prepare her defense against the state-instituted charges of conspiracy to defraud, one for the general elections and another for the regional elections, both held on March 2, 2020. Lawrence was granted bail in the sum of $50,000 in each charge. The former Health Minister's attorney Nigel Yules told reporters that Turk Mohammed from the Director of Public Prosecution Office told the court that he was not ready to move forward with the case as it has been put down until December 9, 2020.
The prosecution on this occasion did not object to bail, but they did ask for substantial bail in keeping with the offense. The magistrate admitted Ms. Lawrence to bail in the sum of $50,000 in each offense, cumulative total of $100,000. We then, the magistrate then inquired from Mr. Tariq Mohammed from the Director of Public Prosecution's Office if they were ready. He said no, they still had, I think, 10 or more statements outstanding. We suggested that they should take more time so that when we come back, they would be ready to proceed with the matter. And as a result of that, the matter has been put down for December, I think it's the 9th. The court has ordered full disclosure, which means that we should also receive copies of the video recorded interviews with Ms. Lawrence. I know you're going to ask me, well, how is it possible that she's charged again? The previous charges were private, were brought as private criminal charges. These are the first set of charges the state has instituted against her. We suspect it is not the last set of charges based on the statements made by the prosecution today. Upon inquiry from the magistrate whether they intended to consolidate all the matters at some stage, Mr. Mohammed said yes, but he couldn't say when. So, given the pattern of conduct that is emerging, it appears as if they intend to have the leadership of one of the political parties constantly running to the police station and then bringing them to court. It is my hope that it could be a little bit more efficiently run when they've completed their investigation, if they can consolidate all that they have to allege, make one job of it so that we don't have to continue to waste your time, and certainly waste Ms. Lawrence's time in coming here, other than if there's some other intent, which is to have Ms. Lawrence exercise and be humiliated every time she has to attend the police station.
Emerging to chants of women power by supporters gathered outside the Georgetown Magistrates Court, Lawrence said she remains strong and insisted on her innocence. Lawrence believes that there is an attempt to have a political pullback and use the state apparatus to harass and prosecute her in the process.
I remain strong. I know I've done nothing wrong. And I continue to say that because that is what it is. You know, as the PPP used to say during the 24 years that, you know, we will have our say and they will have their way. I think that is what we are seeing here. I think Council has explained very well the perception in terms of how the matter is going. The same charges are being laid again before me, this time by the state. And so I want to believe that there's an attempt to have a political pullback and use the state apparatus to harass and persecute me and others.
Lawrence has not explained how her signature appeared on the fraudulent declaration of March 5, 2020, which returning officer Claimant Mingo declared. The declaration contained inflated figures designed to hand the APNU-AFC coalition a victory. On August 24, Lawrence was placed on $100,000 bail in relation to a private criminal charge filed against her for the fraudulent elections declaration of March 5. The charge was filed against her and Mingo since their signatures were found on the declaration. A national vote recount found that the numbers were inflated in favor of the coalition. The charge was filed by PPPC member and current Minister of Culture, Youth and Sport, Charles Ramson Jr., on March 16. Kurt Campbell, Newsroom. When the newsroom returns, the Health Minister visits Berbice hospitals in an effort to equip them to properly respond to COVID-19. You're watching the newsroom. Over 300 persons will have their dream realized and finally have ownership of lands they applied for over the years. The Ministry of Housing will be hosting a 2-day housing drive to assist persons with land application queries and will also be providing an opportunity for residents to meet directly with commercial banks, insurance companies and internet service providers. Minister Colin Crowell assured that the event will be held with strict COVID-19 guidelines in place.
The over 300 persons who will be awarded land titles on Friday and Saturday, names were published in the daily newspaper on Wednesday. These persons are asked to make immediate contact with the Central Housing and Planning Authority. The Ministry of Housing and Water will be hosting the 2-day activity called Dream Realize at the National Stadium at Providence. And Minister Colin Crowell told the newsroom during an interview that the event caters for residents along the east bank of Demerara, but is not limited to only these residents. The event will provide essential services on acquiring lands and provide any clarification or query that residents may have about the process.
In addition to that, and we will be having the distribution of a number of titles for persons who have completed their transaction, and this is for regions 3 and 4. That will be done on Friday morning at 10 o'clock.
In addition to housing services, the event will also have representatives from the Ghana Water Inc., the commercial banks, insurance companies, and a number of internet providers.
It is like a one-stop shop, and this is part of the initiative of reaching out, because persons sometimes over the years they're still seeking clarity, they worry about their application, waiting for years, and so it will provide us an opportunity to update the members of the public.
The minister also addressed concerns persons may have given the country is battling the COVID-19 pandemic.
I want to assure members of the public that all COVID guidelines will be adhered to. In fact, the Ministry of Health is part of our planning and implementing committee. And let me just expand a little as to what we're doing. There are a number of washing sinks around the venue, around the tents. In addition to that, when you're entering the tent area, we also have the necessary spraying mechanisms that will be placed. We have 2 automated ones actually on both entrances. We have our persons or staff involved with ensuring the persons are spaced out in conducting their activities. Even at the seating level, we're ensuring that they're spaced.
Reporting for the newsroom, I am Isanel Patwo.
Minister of Health Dr. Frank Anthony has toured hospitals in Region 6 as the government looks to equip the public hospitals there to meet the demands of the COVID-19 pandemic. 2 ventilators and an oxygen concentrator were handed over to the New Amsterdam Hospital.
These 2 machines, I think, will go a very, very long way in terms of us being able to deliver better quality of service to people who are coming in here. And of course, from time to time as well, we have been getting difficulties getting oxygen. And not only getting oxygen, but we are paying very high costs, and it's extremely expensive, and then sometimes you have to wait. So if you have a couple more like this, Doc, it will be a good thing for us here in the region. And maybe a few more ventilators as well.
We wanted to ensure that our ICUs are better equipped, and ventilators in ICUs are an essential piece of equipment. And we hope that with these 2 ventilators, it would be improving the services that you're offering. With COVID, one of the things that we know that patients with COVID, if they move from the mild form to forms where they have to be hospitalized, meaning maybe a more severe form of COVID, that one of the things that they would need is respiratory support. And in many of the places where we're caring for these patients, respiratory support would either mean that we have to get a BiPAP or CPAP machine, or in some cases to have ventilatory support. And so we are very pleased that we can send these two ventilators to this hospital, and hopefully it would help you to care better for your patients.
We tell you now that health workers at the Georgetown Public Hospital on Tuesday night held a tribute for retired nurse Mark King, who died from COVID-19 on October 5. King served in the profession for 3 decades, during which he touched several lives before retiring in July 2020.
The night of reflection was held at the Georgetown Public Hospital's parking lot with social distancing guidelines in place. Mark King died at the hospital's intensive care unit on October 5th and was registered as the country's 91st death. He was 54 years old. King last worked at the accident and emergency unit at the hospital. Registered nurse Amanda Clark remembers him as a jovial person. She said the simple gesture was necessary to commemorate his 33 years in the nursing profession.
I think for somebody that has dedicated their energy, dedicated their life, should be commemorated in a fashionable way to show their respect, to show their appreciation for what that person would have done in society. Mark just wasn't a nurse. He was a colleague, he was a friend, he was a brother, he was an uncle, and he was a son to someone else. Mark is a dear love to our heart. It's a dear friend of mine, and I'm still sad that I would have lost him.
Similar sentiments were expressed by registered nurse Ron Morris.
I've known Mark for maybe about 18, 19 years when I first joined the profession. He's always been that, and because of his sudden passing due to the COVID-19, it's only fitting to have such a gathering for him.
King was one of 3 known health professionals to have lost their lives from COVID-19. The other persons were a 34-year-old emergency medical technician and a pediatrician who was tested after he died. The health workers also presented a donation to the family of Mr. King in honor of his service to the GPHC. King's brother told the newsroom that he is heartened by the support he received. He also urged persons to take precautions to protect themselves from COVID-19.
I know for certain that firsthand my brother was indeed a humble giant, and he was a very loving person. And without a doubt, I know my brother is in a good place. I've heard a lot of good things about him that really helped me in this time, that people need to take this seriously and to start to live their lives a little bit. It's a different thing in a different time frame that we're living in, that we have to be so careful, and if we can protect ourselves, we'll be protecting somebody else.
Several other persons also paid tribute to the fallen health worker. So far, Guyana has recorded over 3,500 positive COVID-19 cases and over 100 deaths. Bibi Katun reporting for the newsroom.
When the newsroom returns, Minister Pauline Sukai leads a team to mountain communities in Region 8 to distribute COVID-19 relief grants. You're watching the newsroom. Minister of Amerindian Affairs Pauline Sukai has led a team to the mountain communities of Region 8 to distribute cash grants to residents and to encourage them to adhere to COVID-19 guidelines. Isabella Patwa reports.
Here at Kurukubaru, the highest village in Guyana, a team of government workers distribute cash grants to the Patamona people who inhabit the mountainous Region 8.
I'm thankful for this money for get a little help in the home with my parents who is sick with COVID-19. It's 3 years now since my father sick, but he blind and he can't help himself, and now he get the virus and he's in hospital. I feel good and wish come next 6 months more receive next 25.
I'm gonna buy whatever we really need in the home for my family.
The government is providing $25,000 each household as a means of relief during the COVID-19 pandemic. Minister of Amerindian Affairs Pauline Sukai told residents that the government intends to ensure each household receives the grant.
You will understand that we have to deal with the entire country. So all across Guyana, they will get one cash grant per house. We know that some families are big and some families are small, and that sometimes more than one family live in a house. So what our staff or what the payment team has to do is, if there's more than one family, big family in the house, they have to take a record of the second family that is in the house, so that we will be able to ensure that in all future initiatives that we can cover everyone, because we depended on the village council, the Tushao, to ensure that they record every house, and so that we will have at least an accurate number of houses that will receive one grant.
The government has launched a countrywide education campaign with ministers taking the lead in advocating for social distancing and the wearing of face masks to prevent the spread of the coronavirus.
You have to take care of yourself. You have to remain safe. Our government is only 2 months, going on 3 months in office, and we have to deal with reducing this pandemic, removing it from Guyana. But we can only do so with your assistance, and that is keeping yourself safe. So I would really like everyone to mask up. That is the only way we can be able to reduce the spread of or the transmission of COVID-19. If we don't mask up, we put ourselves, our family, and the village at large at risk. So we are asking everyone to mask up. We are asking everyone to social distance, and that is why when I came in, I asked people to step apart from each other. The distance is about 6 feet away. We need to stand from each other, because COVID-19 do not discriminate. Every single person could be infected if we don't take the precaution seriously, if we do not adhere to the advice, to the guidance, so that we can protect ourselves. We need to protect ourselves.
Many hinterland communities had closed their borders to outsiders as a way of keeping out the virus. Reporting for the newsroom, I am Isanella Patwo.
Minister of Culture, Youth and Sport Charles Ramson has announced upgrades for the Indian Arrival Monument at Palmyra in Berbice. The monument was completed and commissioned last year at the cost of $160 million.
There's some things that were going to be included in the project, which was a library, which we would have to cater for as part of our budget. But now that I come to see it, I think that it would do well if we focus more on our cultural activities, so that the hall is used more for the dancing, the groups to practice their dancing and drumming, and anything connected to our cultural background. So that's my initial thoughts. I'll raise it with the president and see what he says. But that's where I would like this area to go. We want to make it a little bit more appealing to. Maybe put some more benches, put some more kid-friendly facilities too. And then maybe plant some more flowers and just kind of keep it well maintained. We'll probably need to get a lawnmower, and then maybe someone who is permanently based here or part-time based here to help to keep it up to a high level.
So that was the proposed library?
That was where the library was going to be proposed, yes, exactly. I think that time's changing a lot. So in exchange for the library, we should probably make here a Wi-Fi zone, so that anyone that's here, that they can have access to public Wi-Fi, because you know information now is just it's accessible on your phone. One of the things that we did as a measure that we introduced as part of our budget was to remove VAT off of cell phones. That's going to make cell phones cheaper, and it's going to make it more accessible to everyone. Now, because of that, we still need connectivity. We need to be able to access that information. So making here a Wi-Fi zone might actually be something that I would like to discuss with the cabinet and to see how we can advance that. The president's very young, so he knows the importance of data and connectivity. So I'm sure he would see the value of being able to have that here.
Months into the COVID-19 pandemic, a Guyanese psychotherapist and life coach is reporting increases in divorce and domestic violence. Shane Tull, in a Zoom interview with the newsroom, talks about coping mechanisms and what people can do to ease the burden of having to deal with COVID-19 and the restrictions which have been imposed to ease the spread of the disease.
With the onset of the pandemic, people's anxiety has just escalated because of the unknown of how long the pandemic is going to last, the information that you receive about COVID-19, to wear masks, and how you have to social distance. Your whole way of life have changed. Your kids are home, you're working from home, and all of these things are taking place in a concentrated area. Everything is in the home. So clearly that is your anxieties will increase, your interaction with people will become more tense because you're home with your kids all day, you're home with your spouse or your partner all day. For the last 6 months, it has really been unfortunate. In my private practice, like most of my couples are on the verge of divorce or breaking up because these are people that have been together for 5 years, but this is the first time they're literally stuck in the house for 3 months. And could you imagine what that brings up? We've seen an uptick in alcohol abuse, drug abuse, domestic violence. Think of a domestic violence situation where the perpetrator is in the house with the victim. Most times the victim probably get a release by going to work, but now they're cooped up in that space for 3 months with nothing to do, nowhere to go. So we've seen a real uptick in domestic violence, drug abuse, substance use, alcoholism as well. So the pandemic has really forced us to look at mental health in this broad capacity, but in a very unique way. And if you're you're also affected by this pandemic, if you're poor and you have a lack of resources, and because now food is limited, other resources are limited, people are losing their jobs, they're working less, so that also impacts one's mental health and how you interact with the people around you, your spouse, your partner, your children, etc.
If there are specific signs that you can let people listening to this know that they can look for, then you can let us know what those are.
I think any signs that is not the baseline of someone's functioning. If you, for example, if you have a coworker and they normally come to work pretty engaged, pretty happy, and all of a sudden they're withdrawn, they're not engaging in conversation, they have a sense of gloominess. I think those are signs that you can look for in terms of if you're in a home with someone, they're not sleeping well, you notice they're not eating, they're not interacting, they're probably drinking more, all of those things, anything that would be outside of the norm for someone that you know well. I think those would be warning signs for us to engage that person.
Now, can you tell us what we can do during this pandemic, particularly against the fact that we have limited access to services, we have to adhere to stuff like social distancing, we can't gather in large crowds. What exactly can we do to protect our mental health from getting bad in the first instance? And then once we realize that it's under threat, what do we do in that instance? How do we, what should we do to cope and to get better?
I think one of the fortunate things about social media, it has allowed us to use that as a way of connecting. Like, you can have Zoom family meetings, and you have to think about the stress this creates in someone where, let's say, someone they lose a loved one. Basically, you would go to their house, give them a hug, take some food, sit with them. In this pandemic, it doesn't allow us that virtue. You really have to think people, and it would really be communication, calling them on the phone, FaceTime, and assuring them, I'm here for you. I understand what you're going through. We are in this together because this affects us all. This pandemic is affecting us and reach out to each other. So that's an added burden in terms of going through a trauma, and you don't have the support that is needed to help you through. So I think those are things that we need to be conscious of, and just having conversations like with your neighbor, because you're in Guyana, you can talk from your window. That's enough social distance in that. Ask them how they're doing. If they have food, whatever you can do to ease the stress for someone else, and you're able to do that, I think that it would be of tremendous benefit.
We're still threatened by COVID-19, and we see across the world, the US and Ghana governments looking to reopen the economy, and that reopening the economy would result in a relaxation of some of the COVID measures and allow people to gather and go back to work and conduct economic business. Do you support the reopening of economies?
I think I do support it, but it has to be done responsible. It has to be done in a responsible way. Because opening up the economy and not enforcing social distancing, encouraging people to wear masks, not allowing them to gather in more than 10 to 15 persons in spaces, that is good. But if you open the economy and people are just flowing in droves, it will spread the virus. The pandemic will be worse. It would last longer. But these are things we can do in a responsible manner. And I always advise everyone I talk to, follow science. Follow the science. Speak to your public health officials and follow their guidance. It's imperative that the economy opens. It's imperative that people get back to a commodity of what's normal in their lives. But I do think we have to look at what's the new normal and find ways to enforce that. I'm aware that people have pandemic fatigue because they've been locked up for 6 months and their whole life has been changed. That is understandable. But from a public health perspective, it's important to empower people with information that will help them and that will support them, and to provide support for people that are fatigued, because this is real. Our whole lives have been turned upside down.
When the newsroom returns, the financial weather and bridge reports along with sports. I'm Kurt Campbell. Take care.
Welcome back to the newsroom. Now for a look at what's happening in sport. We're starting off with some cricket news. So West Indies and New Zealand are preparing to square off in a bilateral series starting in late November and ending in December. They are down to play 3 T20 internationals, the first of which will be played on November 27 in Auckland, while the first of 2 test matches will bowl off on December 3 in Hamilton. We understand as well that there will be an 8-team series happening alongside the 2 test matches. I'm joined by Akim Green as we discuss the possible combination of players that would make up those 2 squads for the international aspect of that series. The Chief Selector, Roger Harper, did mention that West Indies are set for an extended camp in New Zealand. The 15-man test squad, along with 5 reserves and a 14-man T20 squad, will leave for New Zealand on October 27. Akim, maybe we can start with the T20 squad. We know that the World Cup has been shifted now to the end of 2021, and that is something that will be on the radars of both these teams as they head into that series. From the West Indian perspective, we know that the Chief Selector Harper has said that all players are available, which would mean that those players in the IPL currently once they make themselves available, would have to leave early, to head off on that tour. But let's talk a bit about a combination of players that, in your mind, Akeem, that could make up that squad to New Zealand for the T20 aspect.
It all depends on the narrative you want to take. Are you going on the narrative where you say, look, let's give our high performers from CPL an opportunity at international exposure to see what we have on the reserve? Or do you say then, given the uncertainty with COVID, the R series plan, there's supposed to be Sri Lanka coming, the R series on the agenda for 2021, but the uncertainty of COVID and the series could be cancelled and all this different stuff. You don't know how much opportunity you would have to get international T20 cricket being played. So then you will want to start from now to give your best possible representation of that World Cup squad from New Zealand series. It depends on which narrative. For me, Avinash, I'm going with the latter in terms of starting from now in getting the 15 members or whoever you're looking to be in India next October. I want them to be in the West Indies setup from now and playing together and understanding different roles. Because one big thing I'm going to say, 2016 was 4 years ago. There were a lot of young teams at West Indies defeated, and they were the experienced team. Teams have grown in understanding how to combat West Indies since then. There are a lot of different tactics bowlers are using to combat power hitting. For example, they're doing a lot of wide Yorkers, that is obviously you've seen in the IPL, that is Hamburg a lot, Pollard, you short ballers affected Russell, etc. We don't know how much Narayan will be a factor given his issues with his actions. So while West Indies on paper certainly have a strong team, they aren't, to me, that lethal as before, given the opposition have become better against them. So we'd want to start giving them much as possible time, rehearsing different roles in the West Indies colours rather than franchise cricket. So for me, from now, I'm going with all my big guns to New Zealand to start preparing for that World Cup.
Good. You mentioned what happened from 2016 to now. A lot has changed indeed. And while West Indies remain the most successful team in World T20 cricket, they have been struggling in bilateral series. And we have seen over the last couple of years, they have not been winning series as they should, although they have been able to put up at least maybe a half of those quality players that we spoke about that would have been at those World T20 events. The World Cup would have been held at this time had it not been for COVID. And all things being equal, we would expect that all the superstars, the T20 superstars, would have been available for that tournament. 1 year after, those players, of course, adding on age. And one of the contentious issues is whether or not Christopher Henry Gale would be available for that World Cup. We know that he missed the CPL and he's not played so far in the IPL. But since the World T20 in 2016, Akeem, since that 100 against England, he's played in 10 international innings, 125 runs, an average of 12.5. An aging Gale, a highest score of 40 since that 100. How do we include Gale in a T20 setup, maybe starting with this series? Would you go for him?
It's. I'm actually on the fence. I wrote about it yesterday, but I'm actually on the fence with it because, look, Gale is such a dynamic player. Gale is Gale. Gale could do so much damage to any opposition, right? But the thing is, it is a pros and cons situation. He's not running as before. He's not as mobile between the wickets as before. And I know the World Cup is going to be in India, right? So there's a flat pitches there. But as I said, teams have found ways to counteract West Indies power hitting. And the new modus operandi, I call it in T20 cricket, is obviously being great power hitters, but also being able to take quick singles. You look at Virat and AB throughout this IPL, how good they were with hitting the big boundaries and able to rotate the strike on a regular basis. That is something that Gale hasn't been doing. All of these West Indies cricketers we talk about, Pollard, etc., right? They are not the starters they had before who come out from ball one and blast or big sixes. They take time to get going. So let's go a bit practical. Simmons as well takes a bit time to get off the mark. Gale is taking time to get off the mark. They aren't taking quick singles. Wicket goes down. Let's say they're, started out for 2 at the end of the power play. It means the likes of Hetmeyer, Poor, and everyone else is coming in under pressure to get West Indies up to a 180 par total, which is the usual thing in India. So those are the complexities you have when you have a Chris Gale in your team. And that is why I said, it's on defense. But, the World Cup is a year from now, and there's a lot of series that is in between then. Hopefully COVID it doesn't spike worldwide, and they have to postpone, cancel those series, and he can play international cricket. And if he's in form, I'm saying Gale goes to the World Cup. If he's not in form or he isn't playing enough series prior to that World Cup, he does not go, in my opinion. But if he is scratching form and he's simply playing the T20s for West Indies and obviously some leagues in between, and he's in form and he's producing, I'm carrying Gale to the World Cup. But if he isn't, he's not in my World Cup squad.
But there must be a clear line of communication, though, between the selection panel and Christopher Gale, because you have seen before where he has opted to resign and then return to international cricket. So that is something that has to be clear. The selectors and Gale would have to sit down and decide, well, hey, I'm available for the World Cup in 2021, or I'm not available, and that communication line has to be clear. Another issue would be Suriname Hakim. We know what happened in news last week, being called in the IPL. If he plays one more time and is called, but that's the end of him for at least the IPL. How much of a blow is the West Indies not having a Suriname at the World Cup? Do you risk playing him in this New Zealand series?
Yeah, I would. Look, Suriname and Gale are in the same boat, in my opinion. These guys, while some of them aren't producing as they would like as before, the name alone, when you see a Suriname having to come into, he doesn't have all of the, I guess, the mystery as he had when he first started. But batsmen still treat him with great respect because they know what he's capable of doing. And a lot of times you look back at the fact, I guess, in the IPL, when McCullum was there, and they talk about the fact that when Narayan is there, you only look at 16 overs. His 4 are so economical. You say, look, Narayan is going to deal with 4. I can plan for 16 overs. That is the impact he still has, and that is why I believe, if he is willing and he's confident enough in his ability, he goes to New Zealand. Suriname is a big factor. Obviously, over the years, he hasn't played since India were here in the Caribbean last year, but he is a great, potent cricketer. And with him in any team, it looks very different on paper. And it could be a good opportunity for the likes of Pollard to have more resources to call upon.
Yeah, and like Gale as well, I agree with what you're saying. Like Gale as well, though, there must be clarity of thought between the selectors and Narayan as well. Whether he's committed to West Indies cricket, that's another story. We have seen in the past where he has opted out of series and of global tournaments as well. So that is something that the selectors and Narayan will have to sit down and decide whether he would be available for this New Zealand series as well as the World Cup.
What I don't want is that these players opt out to, I guess, 4 or 5 series, and then you see they pop up back one series before the World Cup, or they pop up back in the World Cup squad. I don't want that, because you'll be disenfranchising someone who's been playing all the time. I would have the expectation, legitimate expectation, that based upon their good performances throughout those international series, that they're in line for World Cup selection. And then they just pop up back, I'm available to play for the World Cup, and they're in the World Cup squad. I don't like that. That is unfair to the disem, and to be honest, it disencourages people. You're playing cricket all the time, and then just because of yes, you're a great player, but then you pop up and say, I'm ready to play back for West Indies now. To me, that's totally unfair, and it shouldn't be allowed.
In my opinion, if Suriname Ryan decides that he's not going, or not going to play international cricket, he's not going to the World Cup. Unfair comparison, but I would go with a guy who performed in the CPL. Got runs, got wickets, Roston Chase. We didn't expect him to do that well, and maybe a lot of people didn't expect him to do that well in the T20 format, given the style of play that we know Roston Chase would bring to the fore. But got 225 runs, picked up 9 wickets, and I think he's a like replacement if Suriname Ryan decides that he would not be available for West Indies duties. Your thoughts?
Yeah, he has an economy rate of under 5, and again, I use the word gold dust. That is gold dust in T20 cricket. However, given the West Indies, I guess, batting order and how they would set up,
but that's a predicament.
I really believe, that because he won't be batting in the top 5.
Right.
So he will basically be playing as an outright bowler. And then you would say, then if you're going to pick someone who to be an outright bowler, you would want to go with a more threatening bowler. So that would come back to the likes of obviously maybe Aiden Walsh, etc. So that is the predicament he would be in. Obviously, it's a good choice in terms of your wrong effort. But Roston Chase in the West Indies T20 team at the World Cup isn't going to be batting higher than 6 thereabout. And then obviously at the bottom there, you have the likes of Kimo, DJ Bravo, who can occupy those positions. So that is what in Franchise cricket, he has the luxury of offering that role, but to be the sole spinner for West Indies team in a World Cup team, that is a difficult one to fathom. You know, because let's be put it practical. Let's say you have Gale there, and there's Evan Lewis, there's Leonard Simmons, there's Hetmeyer, there is Nicholas Pooran. You know, those are players that must play, right? And then you obviously have Captain Pollard, and depending on how Russell needs are, he's in there. And then there's Bravo.
Yeah.
You know, who do you see him batting ahead? It doesn't add up there. And then obviously you have Cottrell, I guess Chemo as well, Fabian Allen as well. So that is predicament with Rossin Chase in a West Indies T20 team at this moment in time. Maybe in the future he could become, you know, a great force record, but not right now.
Yeah, well, I'm taking him basically on the spin option. He offers that spin option, and that is why I'm taking him on that series 4. Because to be fair, there isn't anyone that he could replace Sullivan Ryan, a like-for-like replacement really in the Caribbean that could, you know, immediately come and have that impact that Sullivan Ryan has had with both bat and ball.
We tell you now that the Minister of Natural Resources, Vikram Bharat, has agreed to become the honorary patron of the Berbice Cricket Board. President of the board, Hilbert Foster, and a team of executives made the offer to the minister during a courtesy call on Tuesday, and he readily agreed. The delegation comprised Albert Smith, Robbie Sewak, Angela Hanif, Dr. Cecil Behari, and Simon Naidu. The new patron would be sworn in at a special function on November 14. According to the Berbice Cricket Board, Minister Bharat agreed to the setting up of a patron fund. This fund would assist less fortunate clubs and cricketers in Berbice. The minister would also assist the Berbice Cricket Board to ensure the proposed semi-professional league becomes a reality in 2021. The Berbice Cricket Board also handed over several publications to the minister during the meeting. IPL news. Delhi Capitals moved back to the top of the points table in the IPL, beating a struggling Rajasthan Royals by 13 runs in Dubai on Wednesday. Led by a pair of 50s from Shikhar Dhawan and Shreyas Iyer, Delhi Capitals posted 161 for 7. Dhawan made 57 and Shreyas 53. Bowling for Rajasthan, Jofra Archer had 3 for 19 and Jadev Unakat 2 for 32. Rajasthan in reply could only get to 148 for 8, with Anrik Noike getting 2 for 33 and Jabitan Tushar Deshpande 2 for 37. Ben Stokes, who opened the batting top, scored with 41. Robin Uthappa scored 32 and Sanju Samson 25. The victory was Delhi Capitals' 6th in 8 matches and puts them 2 points clear of the Mumbai Indians and Royal Challengers Bangalore. For Rajasthan, their 5th defeat in 8 games has left them struck in the bottom half of the table at number 7. Tomorrow it's match 31 of the IPL and it's the Royal Challengers Bangalore against the bottom of the table Kings 11 Punjab from 10 hours in Sharjah. And with that, we've come to the end of the news for this evening. I'm Avinash Ramzan. Thanks for watching.